the big debate is whether this season has been the worst season ever, or perhaps the best season ever, or something in between. Who wants to kick off? Darren, first of all, you're the man of the press. Best, worst. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention you're a Scouser. Nobody could tell that from your accent, obviously.
I was actually born in Bootle.
Well, yeah, legit then. I apologise. I take it all back. Tim,
Don't worry.
next time,
Don't
tell me.
Don't worry, Dotun. I was joking. I was not.
But you are a red. You are a red.
I am a red. I'm a red because I was a big fan of the legendary John Barnes in the 80s when he played for Watford, and I was a starry-eyed teenager. And then when he moved to Liverpool, I followed him across, and I've supported Liverpool ever since. And I would imagine it's a very similar story for lots of men of my age, of a certain age, in terms of where their support for Liverpool goes back to. I very seldom talk about it, actually, because obviously when you're in the media, you want to be objective, and lots of people kind of mistake you revealing your allegiance to a club for your being staunchly one-eyed in terms of your support against them and won't have a word said against them, whereas that's not the case. But if you're asking me in terms of the season and where it stands, I wouldn't say it's the worst. I wouldn't say it's the best. I'd say it's been a really entertaining in-between season. And yes, we have had dominant winners of the Premier League before at a very early stage. But what we haven't had too often is a race for a Champions League place, which involves, five different clubs, I should say. I would bring in actually Bournemouth and Fulham below them at the time of us recording this, who are in 8th and 9th, because you can never obviously account for any kind of implosion with just a few games to go, and mathematically they could do it if they put a decent run together. But I just feel that the top two clubs, Arsenal were second last season, they're second again. Liverpool have improved beyond the points total they had at this stage last season, and they've been entertaining to watch and consistent. I think that there's been a democratization of the Premier League. Other teams outside of the top four have really spent sensibly, and that investment is now being brought to bear because the competitiveness of the Premier League is really continuing to outdo other leagues around the world, which is why, and I know Tim will speak to this, in some cases, in territories where you would expect people to be big fans of the local football, the country's football, they are big fans of the Premier League. So I would not say that this has been a poor season. I would say that, just one last thing, we have had poor decision-making at the bottom of the Premier League. Clubs that have come up have had managers that naively have tried to play a style of football that they are not equipped for. And they've forgotten all about the basic principle that when you come into the Premier League, you've got to win at any cost. And it might be ugly at times, but you've got to do what it takes to stay above that line. That's why those clubs have gone straight back down, not because they were not good enough to stay in the Premier League, because I do believe had they played differently, they would have stayed in the Premier League. But in general terms, I've been really entertained by this Premier League season.
Dan Bardell, I suppose, and apologies, we've got you on just hours after you suffered a devastating blow against Manchester City. I didn't want to remind you about that, but
no,
the last minute winners are the worst ones, aren't they? They are the flipping worst. There can be nothing worse than you thinking you're going to get a draw at the Etihad Stadium, and then a little known Belgian called Jeremy Doku comes, runs down the left-hand side faster than your defender. I'm not rubbing it in, honestly, but this is how the goal was scored. I'm not rubbing it in, and then crosses the ball in. And who knew? A player that had never scored before for Manchester City gets the winner against you. Good season or bad season?
Well, I think to point towards Villa and the Premier League in general, I think I'm quite fortunate at the moment because I support a team who have something to play for going into the business end of the season, whereas a lot of the stuff, as you've just discussed, is cut and dry. I I agreed with a lot with what's been said previously. I think the little disappointment for me, probably across the entirety of the Premier League, has been the relegated teams that were just spoken about, and then probably Arsenal. I know they've had injuries, but you did feel if Man City were to drop off, and of course, no one saw the drop off that Manchester City have gone on to have this season. Nobody saw that coming. You did always think it would be Arsenal that would capitalise, and I did think at the start of the season that this might be Arsenal's year, and as it turns out, it still might be with the Champions League. Obviously, they've progressed to the semi-finals of that competition, and they're now managing the Premier League and the Champions League with obviously a bigger eye on the Champions League. But it's a shame that they're in that position, because I don't think it would have taken much to get little bit tighter to Liverpool, a little bit closer to Liverpool. So I think the lack of a title race has been the thing that's disappointed me most, because I think Arsenal have let themselves down at times. I'm a big fan of Arteta, and I've really enjoyed what he's done at Arsenal, the way he's galvanised the club, and the whole club pulls in the same direction now, including the fan base, which I think has been a difficult thing to do post-Wenger or even in the latter years of Wenger's tenure. But they've gone backwards in the Premier League this season, despite going forwards in the Champions League. So I guess that's probably my biggest disappointment. But we spoke about the strength of the rest in the Premier League, and the teams like Bournemouth and Fulham on any given day, those teams can be tricky for any Premier League team to go to. And we've seen that many times this season with Manchester City and other teams travelling to those places and not picking up points. So although it may not have been the most exciting season, in some ways, the Premier League is still actually stronger than it's ever been.
I suppose, Tim, that both Dan and Darren that points out the dichotomy in what they're saying. Because on the one hand, Premier League, yeah, Liverpool have won it and have won it for months and months and months and months. Yeah, all the focus on the Champions League or Europe in general, where possible 10 English teams could be in Europe next season, all that focus is distracted away. Whereas what Darren said earlier on, said, look, the whole world wants to watch the Premier League. We're watching Europe. No, we're not. We're watching the Premier League, and all we should be. That is where the competition should be, really, shouldn't it? If we talk about a great season or lackluster season.
Big mate of mine, a great football journalist over here in Rio, he came up the line once. We were watching a terrible game between two awful teams, but it was fabulous. And he said, you know what? The great thing about football is it doesn't have to be good to be good. And that's just as well, because, you know, if it had to be good, teams in the lower divisions wouldn't get anyone watching them. So I think you can make a distinction between quality and excitement. And for the reasons that both Dan and Darren have mentioned, there has been a lack of excitement at both ends of the Premier League, isn't there? With Liverpool wrapping things up really by March, and no relegation dogfight we've known very early. So there's been a lack of excitement there. But I would probably take the view that in general the overall standard is very high. I think we see this when Darren mentioned it, the promoted teams. Now, what they tried to do is replicate what they'd done in order to get promoted. And all of them have found out that they just couldn't do it. I mean, they weren't playing badly early season. But, you know, you're up against a strength of opposition. You really feel this in the Premier League with the power to acquire players that these clubs have. That, you know, even if the newly promoted teams play really well, last 20 minutes, the opposition can bring on 3 or 4, 30 million pound players and win the game there. So I think it's precisely the struggles of the newly promoted teams that tells you how strong the Premier League is. Now, there's a couple of caveats to that. One is obviously, as Dan has mentioned, Arsenal. We all expected more from Arsenal, I think, in the Premier League. The City drop off, personally, I don't find it as surprising. I never thought that they would retain the title. Liverpool have to be the guy after the guy is really hard, and he's made it look easy. And this points, I think, to one of the great strengths of the Premier League these days, with some exceptions, which is how well a lot of these clubs are run. You know, and the choice of coaches is often it's often brilliant, isn't it? I mean, Slot, who on earth is this guy? And look what he's done, and we've seen this over the last few years. When De Zerbi came in, who's this guy? They're people. So the Premier League clubs are obviously doing their homework sensationally well to fight Iraola at Bournemouth. It's sensational the way that the clubs are capable of bringing in really top quality managers, and there are exceptions to this. And I think we've let some dangerous forces into the game with ownership structures, and obviously two of them, the massive exceptions here are Man United and Tottenham, where United, I think, it's a shambles because the whole club is designed to extract money for the owners. That I think is what Manchester United are now all about. And Tottenham are seen as a joke by many on the field, but inside the industry, they're seen as a reference for how much money they make and how low the wages are. So they are, I think, there's some dangerous forces that we've let in. But overall, a lot of the money that is in the Premier League is being spent very wise. I mean, clubs like Bournemouth, Fulham, Brentford, for crying out loud. And go back 20 years, we never expected these clubs to be in the top division, let alone playing so well in the top division. So I think the progress of those clubs is a testament to the fact that a lot of the money that comes into the Premier League is being wisely spent.